Thank you, and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority for Harrisburg, and I will call the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the December 18th meeting, which you all received previously. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Audrey, thank you. A second? Second, Kathy, thank you. On the question, any comments? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right, chair report. I'm allotted 3 minutes, but I'm not sure I have 3 minutes worth of subject matter, but I'm joking just a little bit. We are pleased that the city got the budget completed. We got it completed on time and that it's a balanced budget. And I want to congratulate the city's finance staff for the work that they put into it. And we'll also say some kind words to council for the diligence they took over a set of public hearings to review in some level of detail everything that's included in the budget. As we discussed last time, the budget was on the cusp of final approval. There had been a couple amendments the council added that the mayor subsequently vetoed. And we do have, was sent to the rest of the board, the final version of the budget. And thank you to the finance staff for sending that to us as well. We at the city council meeting last night, Brian, maybe you can address this a little bit later during your report. It was noted that the 2023 audit has been filed.
No.
2022, I'm sorry, yeah.
Is about to be.
It's about to be filed.
In draft form.
Okay.
Yes.
And then 2023 will be on its way soon. Talk about that a little bit later. Other than that, I just want to take a quick moment to introduce Mr. Robert Koenig, and he is the new finance director for the city. Welcome, with all of 2 weeks under your belt here.
Something like that, yeah.
And
Pardon me, yeah.
yeah, cool. Very good.
Yeah.
But I'd invite you to say a word or two, if you'd like, a little bit on your background and your transition to the city.
Well, I live. Most of my background is in industry, primarily manufacturing, a little bit of distribution. And I was looking for a career switch when the company I was working for was winding down, basically going into the blue. And I was looking for a nonprofit or a government position. And when the Harrisburg finance director position popped up, I said, well, I'll give it a shot. The worst that can happen is to say you have no government experience, get the hell out of here. But my CPA, I think helped to get me at least into the door. And everything's been going well ever since.
Good. Well, and this is, I guess, your first live introduction to us and the role that we play in our interaction with the city and the oversight advisory responsibility that we exercise. And so we're going to look forward to working with you. Separate from this, I'll look forward personally to the opportunity of setting up meetings with you and the mayor in between our meetings so that we can build a good relationship, keep up to date, get a little bit of advance warning maybe of things that we need to know in this capacity, and then also to talk to you about how we can be of assistance. Thank you very much.
Very enough.
Very good. Next on our agenda, we have scheduled Neil Grover, city solicitor, to discuss a number of issues. Neil isn't with us yet, and so I will exercise prerogative of the chair and shuffle the agenda just a bit. And Brian will offer you the opportunity to do a report.
Right. Thank you, Chairman Hill. I appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. Brian McCutcheon, Accounting Manager, City of Harrisburg. Mainly what I wanted to go over today, I've handed out, there's 2 handouts. And the first one is just a recap of fiscal year 2024 for the general fund. And of course, it's closed out or reconciled now through the end of last year. And we've opened up the 2025 books, accomplished that on January 7th with the new books becoming available to staff along with the posting of the approved and finalized budget. So a couple of key takeaways on the general fund. The city ended with a negative not quite 1.2 million expenses over revenue for fiscal year 24. And it resulted in a cash ending fund balance of 18.5 million. One thing, it's not included on my report, and you see this on the monthly report that the controller's office submits to elected officials, which always includes the encumbrances that are still outstanding. And I don't ignore that, but I reconcile based the cash basis through the final, well, through each period, it's cash basis. But the encumbrances that were shown in the system at the end of 24 are significantly high. They're well over $7 million, which is that's an abnormal amount. But the main reason behind that is 2.2 million of that. The city had to change order up two encumbrances in December that relate to the FNB field project. And there was a rush of encumbrances that happened late last year where contracts had to be solidified so that the vendors could be confident in moving forward with the work they did. And there wasn't enough budget as we anticipated to accommodate that. So what we did do, though, was move that into the general fund, into the city's facilities and special projects budget unit, which actually is appropriate. All along, the city's general fund has been funding via interfund transfers to the senator's fund to make this project happen. So it was a budget managerial move to make sure that we don't have a negative result in the major object levels for the senator's fund. So conversely, in just recently in this month, with the understanding that it was temporarily there in the general fund, it's been now change ordered back to the senator's fund. And accordingly, there's enough budget because we properly planned for this year's budget for the senator's fund to accommodate what the anticipated spend is, which in this budget is it's a bit north of 10.1 million for that particular fund. So just to relay that's why the general fund's encumbrances at the end of 24 are going to be roughly 2.2 million in excess of what you typically see. And we're currently right now analyzing those encumbrances that actually, when they're with the new system, they roll forward, but we want to confirm that they are needed. If they're not needed, we could just simply close them out, and then we don't have to go before council to ask for additional appropriation to accommodate those encumbrances. So we're working on that. So the ending cash position of the general fund, as I mentioned, 18.5 million. That's a good 1 million at least dollars in higher than I anticipated back when we met in December and even earlier in 24. I was thinking somewhere between 17 and 17.5. And the main reason behind that is the city did receive a stop loss. I mentioned this at our prior meeting, a high stop loss payment of 1.1 million. So that actually contributed to why this cash position is where it is at the end of 24. Any questions on the general fund?
The one question, if we can, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay. The FNB Stadium project, you have scheduled expenditures this year for 2025, which are now, as we heard, back in the senator's fund. You do not expect to get any reimbursement from the state of Pennsylvania on the RCAP grant during this fiscal year, or some portion of that do you think you might get?
And
But
we are expecting that later this year, because the original envisioned timeline on this project was for 3 years, starting in 2023. Okay. So and I think the project seems to be I think it's important to get it done. I think relative. I think that's the expectation to be in good position prior to the onset of the new baseball season. Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
But it is, our cap is reimbursement, right? So is there?
Right.
Is there enough work to be able to even bill them a significant amount?
I would think at this point there would be, and I don't know, I'm not hands-on so much with the reimbursement submittal process because I know, I think our grants, the city's grants manager has talked with, partnering with, Harrisburg Redevelopment Authority to get a good feel of what is, I know there's a specific, set amount of documentation that needs to be in good shape before you submit. So we want to make sure we get that, of course, in good shape and lined up.
I just remember, Ralph Vartan had dealt with some RCAP projects and he was a little dire and saying it was taking him almost 2 years
It does.
to get the
I
money
just said,
back.
I'm waiting for a payment from the state now for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
For
So that
one
just
year
means-
spent.
Don't
that-
count your heads.
No, right.
That's why I asked if you were optimistic that you might actually see some money, but no, it all comes eventual.
Yeah.
But it's just,
Right.
there's such a delay between the expenditure and the reimbursement, it
Yeah.
could take. No matter, the best of intentions, it takes time, and there are, because I want to make this clear that it's not anybody's fault. It's just a very complicated process that you have to go through. There's usually, I believe the state assigns a third-party reviewer to make sure that the request for reimbursement or reporter before they actually get remitted by the state. So that reviewer has to take some time going through the documentation. Months to go through.
Right, it's like two separate projects, to get it all together to submit, and then like you just said, it has to be evaluated that way. I'm being optimistic, hoping that we would be able to, the city would be able to realize that in the latter part of this year, even beyond, maybe even in the fourth quarter
Sure.
of this year, if that's even feasible. That's the plan.
To be optimistic.
Yeah. Right.
Mr. Chairman, was the stop loss related to medical payments?
Oh, yes, it was, and that reflects, the negative side of things where the city had an extraordinary amount of medical claim expenditures that occurred in 2024.
If it's okay, Mr. Chairman, one question on that. Brian, you said at the last meeting that you had a switch in stop loss carriers. And you weren't sure if there were additional remittances coming from the old carrier or perhaps it would switch over to the new carrier. Can you enlighten us a little on how that ended up working out in the last part of the year?
Sure, yes, and again, that transition occurred. Our stop loss carrier, the policy period runs December through November. And that took effect last year. There have been, to my knowledge, there's been no communication of additional stop loss payment coming. And on the bright side, so far with the claims that have happened, like even in the latter part of December after we met, and so far they're back to what you would expect at a comfort level. Not these claims that were like upwards of $500,000, on a weekly basis. That would pop up every month, it would seem. So, but as there's no way to forecast that.
That's the downside of the self-insurance.
Yeah.
Health insurance system.
But we're off to a good start this year. All right, so that's the general fund, and attached to that same handout is the Neighborhood Services Fund, which is more summarized. In the general fund, I break it down by the city's functions. But of course, the function in the Neighborhood Service Fund is primarily public works. But this includes the Neighborhood Service Fund proper on the far left column, and then the 3 municipal boroughs that the city provides trash collection and disposal services to. And then in the middle there, in the bold, where we began, we were at 5.8 million with the cash position, and we ended with a 5.2 cash position at the end of last year. part of that decrease, by the way, there was an extra with the authority, Lackawanna, that handles the incinerator. They bill the city bi-monthly. It's not a monthly bill. So there was actually in 2024 absorbed two invoice periods from December of 2023. So that contributed to why the expenses came in over revenue, but it's not the full explanation, but the semi-monthly billing from Lackawanna tends to be for the city's accounts in the $300,000 range for disposal fees and costs. So that's part of 2024 was, absorbed an extra billing. Half a month's billing, I should say. So that's in the middle, and then I always have included here the two older funds that are still in existence and accommodate revenue into the city that relates to the city's liens ongoing on both sanitation and disposal, as the city still has its functioning lien system within the mainframe system. But those liens are tied to these two old funds, so that's why they're still relevant for this presentation. So that's the summarized look at neighborhood services. Any comments or questions on that? Before I move on to my last handout, which specifically deals with the American Rescue Plan Act funds, just another comment on the general fund. And I put this in the monthly report that we send out to MADRA at DCED. What was favorable, I thought, for 2024, the city actually, its original revenue budget for 2024 was 109.5 million, and that's huge because of the ARPA funds. But within that, there was an anticipation of using fund balance of about 5.3. So really, then that means the city estimated what we thought it would be for 2024 will be a much lower, around 104 million for 2024, and our actual revenue came in and exceeded that, which is, I think, very a good projection budget-wise on our revenue. We know how important we are looking at the concerns about the city's revenue. And then actual expenses for last year were higher than that, 105.6 million. So we ended up using a cash balance resource position of about 1.2 million, which is favorable. When you look at the budget for last year, we were anticipating 5.2, 5.3. So the general fund did very well in those respects, looking at the original appropriation. The second handout, as I mentioned, is on the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, and it's a two-page handout. The first page is just to give you a sense of course, the money that came in from the federal government, a little over almost 47.1 million, and how that was handled throughout from when this was received back in 2021 and 2022. There were direct payments that occurred out of those federal funds directly for the HVAC renovations project for the public safety building, which was over 5.2 million. There were also determined and awarded bonuses for first-time responders for police and fire. That was a payroll item. So those two items together were 6.3 million of the total almost 47.1. The rest of the money was working through in conjunction with city council and also through the law bureau and crafting legislation to figure out how to manage these funds, where the city opted to take the revenue replacement classification approach. And the line items are detailed out there where the money was transferred into the general fund to accommodate those particular lines. This also reflects the required federal compliance reporting that any recipient of these funds has to do. And we've been doing that, of course, over the recent years and months. And we are now not only, the big concern was about getting everything obligated by the end of this year, and then actually get everything spent by the end of 2026. The city has actually achieved both through the end of 2024. And there's a report that's coming due for the December quarter, which it's due by the end of this month. So I'll be working on that submission. That takes really a tremendous amount of pressure off many people and many city staff on how the city was going to manage and handle accommodating the initiatives and the health and economic impact programs. But the revenue replacement classification was a very productive move to manage these funds. So you can see, I've also included to show the transfer of the funds to the general fund to accommodate those lines, when the transfers happened, the amounts and the dates. Now, the second page, and this dovetails back to what City Council, what the mayor's initiatives were for creating resources for these particular programs. So again, the money was transferred into the general fund and has now been subsequently transferred out to our grants fund. It's done that way so we can track it with project coding, which we have individual project codes that accommodate all these particular lines, affordable housing, home repairs, demolition, the Hall Manor pool project, and so on. So the budget has been established there, and then over on the right, you can see what the status is currently based on what has actually been expended and what has been encumbered. And there's still a significant remaining piece that is still out there as far as being available status-wise. But this does not mean, this doesn't jeopardize the federal money in the sense, if you look at this and you say, well, Brian, you haven't acted upon 22.8 million. That's not the case. Really, again, it's important to realize the federal compliance has been achieved by way of the direct pays and the revenue replacement classification items that I just reviewed. So that's just a quick summary update of ARPA and where we're, how we're going to move forward from here.
Quick question.
Yeah.
For the non-accountant here.
Yeah.
One is if this was transferred to the general fund, there's two assumptions I would make. One is that the 26, almost 30 million in 2024 should have shown a $30 million extra fund balance because it wouldn't have been spent because it's being held to be spent for the ARPA. So this is just so that's me trying to figure out how this money goes and where it sits and how it gets spent. And then the follow-up, I get maybe the preliminary question to that was when the ARPA monies first came out, I thought there was a cap of $10 million that any city could recoup for its lost revenues. And so just wanted to get a little bit more familiar how we were able to park over 40 million in revenue replacement.
So yes, your latter question, and I think the test of my memory from the final ruling was if you were not able to manage to come up with certain initiatives or programs, you could just simply say, okay, we're going to, if you had received that at least 10 million, you could say, we're just going to use that as revenue replacement and leave it at that. You didn't have to worry about creating programs that would require various compliance requirements that you would have to achieve. I think that was the option. It sticks in my mind that you could do either or. And that 10 million was the available, the available amount. I think it was limited to that, but I'm a little fuzzy on my recall
That's
on
what
that.
I thought.
But
So why don't we just do that? I want to welcome Neil Grover, the city solicitor, who is invited for a separate agenda item, but this is actually one of the questions that we had hoped to explore with you, and so
I would look at
invite
the
you.
$10 million, like you look at the standard deduction option on your tax return, you can itemize, or you could do a standard deduction. Sure, I said I would look at the $10 million as like the equivalent to the standard deduction option. You could have elected to do the $10 million. But otherwise, you have to detail your revenue losses, which is what we did instead. So we detail, and they have incredibly generous formula from the U.S. Department of Treasury on revenue replacement formulas. We knew before we got the first dollar that under the time period, based on that formula, we could exceed over those years just on what's normally spent on police and fire, but you could get a multiplier as public safety expenses, that we'd be able to have enough expenses to cover the whole thing. And so that ultimately was the option we had. And what we did was opt certain expenditures that were direct, like for fire radios and part of the police building repair. It's a third one of them, bonuses for police and fire. Those were acceptable categories. Revenue replacement was the equivalent of a category. It just has a whole lot less reporting requirements. As far as I know, the Commonwealth opted for some or all of their money to be revenue replacement to avoid that exact same thing. All of the reporting and extra reporting requirements from the federal government. So that was, we had enough, we were allowed to basically say, this is our cost for public safety, year over year for each of the years of this. And when you take those expenditures out of the budget and the actuals, it exceeds the 40-some million total. So that is where it was. We could have opted for the 10 million. We did not.
So just putting on a hat, because I am JQ Public, revenue replacement in the broad term of ARPA was you all suffered because of COVID. And so how do we translate this to say we're still we're replacing future expenses with the categories, but that money wasn't lost or
So there were monies lost, right? But we also have a formula of how they replace it. So what you lost and the formulas replacement are not anywhere close to dollar for dollar, right? So what we lost is we lost all the parking money, right? And then we had we had some reductions and other things, but we had clear losses that were there. And you were allowed to plug those in and then take it again, very generous in terms of getting the credits for revenue replacement. Plug that in, and then it was simply following the U.S. Department of Justice regulations. We had NW's the consultant, which we had talked with them as well. It was an option that just was favorable, and it was intended to be favorable to local and state governments. I will note, at least on my side of the world, some ran with that so remarkably they covered significant budget deficits and are now about to feel the consequence of that, having used up the money because they don't have replacement revenue for the future, but they've contracted like they're still going to have that size of a budget. And I was talking with one of the consultants, and the actually said a little yesterday about how many places are moving towards distress status because of that. Because they treated it like forever money. We have not treated it like forever money. We treated it, we think, with the purpose and intent that it was to assist the city through the period of time, and it allowed us to create one-time only program money over here in state grants and still, but reduce the overall administrative burden of the federal government.
and again, JQ Public had. So the way I would interpret it, again, is that the city found a way to bank this money by following the formula and saying that this is what it's going to replace, yet being true to the money, it has banked it so that the issues that we see on the next page can be covered with the savings or the revenue replacement funds.
Correct.
Is that right?
And if we're going to be absolutely technically correct, It is not what I would call an escrow fund. It's not like a donation earmarked for one thing. State grant money fund for this money is essentially general fund money placed into that for these programs. If the future needs change for the city, before these programs are fully exhausted, it would be a decision of the mayor and the council to come back and redo it. So they would have the discretion like they would with any other general fund money to say, you know, so a bridge collapsed, you know, that to redirect the money because it's sitting there, the equivalent of fund balance, but purposely set aside for programs that were promised, that are one-time programs.
And there is actually, and it would have been nice if I would have had it. There's a separate schedule that calculates what Neil just said that we created on revenue replacement, where there's 4 years where you calculate, and it is very generous. You know, when you look at what calcs out compared to what typically the city's normal revenue stream is for the year. But the total of those 4 years on the calculation was right around the $41 million mark. So you can see that we didn't violate that. In other words, using 40.7 as revenue replacement was in compliance with that calculation.
Just to go back to, former Chair Carter's question. The first part, the 26.25 million, which some of which is expended, some of which is in open encumbrances, and some of it hasn't even been encumbered yet.
Right.
Where is that? Are those in general fund funded projects? Or did you
That
subsequently put money someplace aside so that it would be available to fulfill those programs that were decided by the mayor and council?
right now, Jeff, that money was transferred from the general fund to the state grants fund.
Okay.
A
so it's
different
out of the
fund.
general fund.
Right, if you would look at the cash position of that fund on the books right now, it's right around, say, $30 million,
Okay.
give or take.
Sure. I think what you were asking was,
Right.
why didn't it show a bigger fund balance? And the answer is, because they moved it out of the general fund into
Right.
this other
Yeah.
fund.
There was really a matching, if you will, of revenue into the general fund, in the federal grants fund in
Right.
24, and a corresponding transfer out to the state grants fund. And that dovetails back to our DCED report that shows, it reflects, you know, why revenues and expenses were that much higher, roughly the same, around 26.5 million compared to the year to date, compared to prior year 2023.
Sure.
Both of those happenings explain that variation.
But the bulge has passed through the general fund, so it won't
Right.
skew the general fund any further than it already has. Not
Right.
impacting revenues, expenditures, or fund balance in the general fund, because it's now in a subordinate.
Correct. That's more meaningful because we get it out of the way for 24, and then it's a better picture looking at current year.
And so if I understand correctly, then by handling it in this fashion, then we also avoid the federal clock with the timeline issues.
I truly believe that's accurate, because again, you know, both obligation and spent. And I believe, you know, with this transfer within the general fund in and out, that's satisfied. The transfer into the general fund from the federal grants fund is the spend, right?
Right.
Along with those other direct pays that happen with, you know, for example, the HVAC, the public safety.
From their point of view, from the Department of Treasury's point of view, it's done.
And that's what we've been reporting as well on their website for the quarterly report.
As long as we're responsible about the future spending.
And the administrative burden was reduced dramatically by doing it that way.
I think it's important for the public to know that the money still exists.
Right.
For the programs that were decided.
Yes.
I credit Neil and the law bureau with that result. It was just so meaningful, yes.
And then I understand as well on the page 2 expenditures, then the ones that show neither expenditure nor open encumbrance are some of the ones that Neil was referring to in his remarks, that should a future need arise where you need, you, city council and mayor need to do reallocation, those are the ones most likely.
They would have that ability to tap those if that was their joint desire.
Right.
On that same page, I'll just point out the one in particular for delinquent refuse and disposal accounts, okay, and that's showing, you know, remainder, but that will be acted upon. That's lined up to be transferred into into the neighborhood services fund. So that's there, the top side of that is the transfer. The real work on that is to evaluate, to go through and decide which customer accounts are to be applied. That's a project in and of itself.
Would I interject something real quick?
Please.
From an industry standpoint, something that's similar but different. The company I previously worked for got a loan from the federal government for $1 million. And at the time, it was really unallocated for anything. And we don't have any funds, like the government would have. But at the end of a certain time period, there were certain categories of expenses where if you could show the government that you exceeded a certain norm or you maintained a certain level of expenditures, and we used payroll as one of the big ones that we were able to use. And by showing that our payroll expenses met their criteria, the entire $1 million was forgiven. So that's a similar but different situation.
So that's the extent of that presentation on ARPA.
And
That's,
you want to say a quick word about the audit completion?
oh, yes. So, there is a draft that has been circulated now to the audit committee. The audit committee hasn't actually convened and met yet. But before I came over here, I saw a flurry of emails that came back from our audit committee members. So I'm hoping, like I was looking at next week, you know, to achieve that. So the main part of the audit is obviously completed. We're so close now that we have a draft statement. Our auditors are coming in tomorrow actually to finish up their testing on the single audit side for the lead program. So I anticipate, you know, that by the end of next week, we can finally release a signed audit report from Boyer and
For 22.
for 22, right? And then last night's discussion talked about last night's discussion talked about, you know, the presentation to council of the 2023 engagement letter, and also the modification of the 2022 audit fee. There were several reasons I went through that explained that the Boyer and Ritter's position on that. I also distributed, there was a historic schedule of the too many schedules, I know, of the audit fee over the years. And even with the increase in modification, a lot of these fees are actually pretty comparable when you look to the prior auditing firm, Meyer Dussel, when they did the audit. There is really some good consistency there when you look at the audit fee structure. So council seemed to be pretty accepting of the presentation I did. So I'm hopeful they'll vote on that next.
I do have one question. Obviously, the recommendations that Boyer are going to do for 23. Are you going to require the assistance of Mayor Dussel as you have in previous budgets to do that small part that they've been working on?
We've already got that rolling, and actually, they've done a good bit of the sections that we asked them to complete.
We are assisting again.
Yes, yeah. And I actually plan to, we have, you've seen, I believe you've seen Alex Burstein. He's been here when he's attended. He's the city's recent new financial analyst. I'd like to involve him in assisting me with that project. I think he would be very helpful to that.
Thank you.
And I know 22 is history at this point, but traditionally, the ICA would have been invited to the audit committee meeting when the presentation was made. And so that may have been an oversight. And I know at the last meeting, several members got very confused because we were so many years behind, but I'd like to make the request that next year that the ICA be engaged so that that we could hear from the auditor.
Well, actually, Audrey, I was still thinking of this for, for next week. I just,
Oh,
the committee meeting, I just pitched it out to them to see what was available. But again, I was gonna circle back
Okay.
and to include
And
this.
and
board.
even if I could zoom in, maybe I will. If I don't know when you
Yeah.
pitched a meeting for it, but I'm always available to be as flexible as I can. And I just sit in and listen.
And they're traditionally at 5:30.
Yeah, no, that's something great. So, yeah, as long as I can get some login information, I'm okay with just sitting there and.
But Brian, is that the action on the speech for the presentation of the auditor at that point, or is this just a meeting to bring them up to speed?
No, in talking to Matt, I think it's to have him come and actually go over and present.
So that would be the one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't have to go to everyone.
It's-
That's all there should be.
It's just been a lot has been happening to achieve that in these early weeks.
I think I was at the last one.
And it's been, to coordinate, I'm trying to, as I should, involve, the city clerk to do everything, the advertising but I have to get everybody's okay for a good date.
Yeah,
And then I have to be mindful of Matt's schedule, right? We're that close, but I want to make sure it works for him.
well, like I said, we'll always try to be flexible, one of us or multiple of us. You do what you have to do to set it, and then I'm sure the ICA board and myself will do our best to attend whenever it is.
and we just had a very good relationship with Alex Reber when he was the chair, and so that communication happened in advance, and he would check with us in advance as well. So
So now
maybe,
there is,
It's Austin Cheers, right? And
so
Alex.
maybe you can just.
Alex, he did send me an email today, so he's definitely, he's tapped in. So I apologize, Audrey, if
Again.
you and the board were worried that you were being out of the loop on this, because I know it's important.
And again, it's history.
glad to see that you're moving to 23.
And nobody's,
It's almost time to do 24, so.
yeah,
But, obviously, the city has really tried to step up and catch up on the audits. And I think just for those who didn't hear the discussion last night, you explained very eloquently why
Thank you.
you haven't fully been able to catch up. But
Yeah.
maybe in the next year, we'll have more progress. in That.
right, and our new finance director, I'm very happy about that, and of course, and our new business administrator, Sam Solkowski, he's also here in attendance, so it's good to feel that and have that support.
Right. We'll catch up.
Any other questions for Brian? Okay, our featured guest at this meeting is City Solicitor Neil Grover. And before we actually get the discussion going, I just want to make the note that I wear a number of different hats in interactions for different agencies with the city, and Neil and I have had a lot of touches along the way on a lot of different topics. And I'm always impressed with the dedication to the city and the breadth of knowledge. And as we all know, the amount of time and diverse areas where you're constantly being pulled in different directions. We are pleased that the city's improved your staffing support and. hope
So
that-
mine, yes.
I hope that's been helpful. And so just with that as preface, welcome to the meeting. And I don't know, did you have anything that you wanted to say to us first? Or because I know we have some questions that you've.
The email had about, I think, 5 categories on it. The only thing I would say, many things are in the midst of either litigation or negotiation, so I am limits to what I can speak of.
Right.
But I can sort of give you an overview of a variety of topics. I would, if I want to say what I consider what this board does and the city does, and our office in some ways acts with the business administrator and others to be the risk manager and lack of a risk management office. And as always, for everybody, every municipality, there are things that are long-term risks that are being looked at. The biggest one being the post-COVID reality of office tower taxation and what that's going to affect. I sat through a meeting of solicitors from around the state last year. It was the first topic on the agenda. And no one had an answer when that part was over about what that's gonna mean for the future. But, you know, we are still in the middle, I think, down 19 or 21 separate legal challenges to the taxes for the high rises in the downtown area. Ones that have resolved have cut the assessed values by 2/3. That is an enormous hit, and the projections are far out. And that's a direct result of the change, not just in the country, but in the world of the remote work has become an acceptable form for operations in government and out of government. And so it's a cultural change that's going to hit everyone. Bloomberg reported last August a $552 billion loss in office revenue around the country between 2019 and 2023. And we are simply as swept up in the same issue. It's obviously an issue bigger than us. It's one the state's going to have to come to terms with. And it may be the thing that forces a state constitutional change in the tax structures for local governments, because it's designed for municipalities to support themselves on real estate tax. That's the primary source of revenue. And if you take away the primary payers of those, it does alter, you know, how government's going to have to function for the long term. So we are involved in those discussions as you guys are involved in looking at the big picture long term. That is a long-term issue that we face and every other city faces, and some of the suburban office park places as well. So it's a real issue that's there, and there's no good solutions. The Commonwealth has given up all but 4 floors of 333 Market Street. That's our largest building in the city. You know, they had a long-term lease that expires this April, and they've extended, I think, it for 2 years. What's remaining. So those are significant issues in terms of long-term revenue, which the mayor is aware of, the council is aware of, and calculations are being done to sort of make projections. I think it was our first year, Brian, in 2025, when we projected a downward on the real estate for next year. But it's coming. It's a slow train that's coming, and it's going to impact things long term.
And a lot of that's a function of the methodologies for assessment for commercial property. So it's income approach, comparable sales, and replacement cost.
Right. So
And 2 of those 3 legs were hit by vacancies.
everyone's coming in with the income approach, and rightfully so. And they're showing you that leases are over, and no one is willing to negotiate at the same rates they were. In downtown Philly last summer, 5 of their largest towers sold for less than 50% of what they were purchased for originally years before. I watched a presentation for the Bank of New York in Mellon Pittsburgh Tower, which they don't own. And the presentation was they have a $10 million negative assessed value, because that's what it costs to keep the building and the lights when it's empty. I'm not even sure what a negative assessed value means, but that was the presentation. And so it's an issue everywhere. There were Allegheny County's executive proposed a 46% increase in real estate taxes, just I think to tread water. So we are, as often things hit Harrisburg after they hit other larger cities, but you know, the writing is on the wall. Thank you. That was lonely. Yeah, I've never been a deliverer of good news. It's really not what I do.
Thank you. Well, so yeah. Our manager did furnish a handful of questions for you, and I get the first one on the list is city exit from Act 47. And I'm guessing that's going to be qualified a little bit by your earlier remark that some of it's relating to pending litigation.
I can give you where we are with where the matter, it's still an ongoing piece. The court has extended the discovery deadline in that case to the end of this March. The city has been served with its second very significant, I guess, third significant subpoena in the case, as has the Commonwealth, as has CRW, for corporate depositions, corporate information. We have produced somewhere around 200,000 documents so far in the case. The original case had 7 defendants in it. The court let 1 of them out. On the docket, you will see 4 of the remaining 6 have settled, but settlement information is not publicly available at this point. There are two primary defendants are still litigating pretty vigorously. And the trial is, I think, set for this fall, and that'll happen That's anyone's guess. The reason we are tied the way we are to this particular case, because in the plan, it authorized the litigation in the first place, and in the court's prior ruling, it said the only legal person who had standing was the coordinator. When we leave Act 47, there is no Act 47 coordinator anymore, and then the question is, does anyone have standing to pursue the remaining points? So that, you know, there are proposals on how to get out, but because there's never been such a case in the court, no one can predict what the appellate court will say about that question. So that is where the hesitation to leave is. We could leave, but the thought is you would lose those claims, which are really the taxpayers' claims at the end of the day, for what they are paying in so many ways. On the other side of that point, I think I've raised this every time I was here, we are still in litigation from entity who's a multi-unit building owner that started in 2015, challenging our trash rates as violating state law. That is coming very close to a head. You know, we are in the period where discovery is closed, and expert reports are being exchanged. You know, and we've given, I think we had 6 designees for the corporate deposition of the city in that. But you know, they're on their 4th law firm, and you know, they are moving it towards trial if they get the trial. You know, their claim is that the rates are being charged the entire time are improperly high.
Sorry, Neil, what did you say was the last thing?
There have claimed the entire time the rates we charge for trash for commercials are improperly high. Our position is it's approved by a court, so by definition, it's reasonable. That's how I went reasonable. The judge already said so. But they have fought this the entire way, and it's going to be, I think, still a long-term fight because there really is no. It's an all or nothing kind of piece of litigation. There's no compromise that sits there. We originally did try to compromise the case way back when, but it seems to be all or nothing. So we will have a clearer answer on that later this year, most likely, about where we're going. But we are still defending that pretty vigorously.
Questions from members of the board? Thank you. One of the questions that is also pending is relative to Broad Street Market. And that's a managed by a nonprofit owned by the city and all the other pieces relating to recovery and restoration.
There are many pieces. Are there specific questions? Or are you looking for an overview?
I think the idea was to understand the obligation of the city towards the reconstruction project.
So the city had, at the time of the fire, I'll call it bundle, it's the wrong word, but that's what it is, a bundled building insurance policy. It means the values of all the buildings are bundled into one number. So there is sufficient insurance money for replacement of a brick building. As people have dealt with fire insurance and such things, their obligation was to put back to the level that was there. And so there are certainly things that would have to go in that are not covered, or at least not fully covered. There is some coverage for what's called code replacement, but it's capped under the policy. And code replacement are things like ADA and fire sprinklers and things like that, which tend to be fairly expensive. We have a approved commercial or construction manager firm operating it. We have a approved architect that's in the designs. I in fact think there's a presentation tomorrow sometime of the next phase of design that's going to happen. So they've been at this for a while. I think the thinking has evolved, but there's not clear funding for it yet. Other things have to happen that are outside that insurance coverage. We always knew some of it was not going to be covered. There's a $25,000 capital professional service fees, right? That's gone by a long stretch of the imagination. So that's not covered by insurance money. The long-term use of that tent is not covered. The initial coverage for that tent is covered. So there are real expenditures that come. The proposed design which is not finalized yet, is trying to incorporate things like utilities for both buildings in the long term. People have probably seen the sketch of an interim glass thing in the middle. Obviously, that's something that's an idea that has no funding. The mayor is vigorously looking for funding for such things. But we recognize that we can only do what's funded. So the brick restoration is on track to keep going. I don't have a deadline from the facilities manager. They have not, the bids for the construction part can't go out until the design is approved. So that's later this year, that when we get to that phase. I don't know if one would say construction on that is complicated or not construction. Right, but sometimes it's easier to fix something that's completely ruined than to patch it. So it's really going to be about the historical restoration piece that people have concerns for. But we've found many people have interest in the Forestry market, how it should look and how the future should be. And I don't think I've hesitated to say so. So it's moving along. It's slower than anyone wants. Those of us in that world have said it was going to be slow with the day of the fire. And that's the reality, knowing how public procurement works and knowing there wouldn't be sufficient funds immediately, even under any policy for this kind of thing. So it's earmarking money. The council, the mayor have earmarked and then voted to appropriate, and I forget the number, a certain amount of money already for portions of this. And then we have our adjusters are involved, and we have a specialist, a forensic individual, Marsh, that is there and processes those claims with forensic people for the carrier to maximize our coverages of a different part of the policy. So, we've given a lot of thought and a lot of technical work, and now we're really moving just towards the final design.
So that, and you talked about code matching, but then I'm presuming some add-on costs while you're at it, of things like an HVAC system that is lacking.
I can imagine too. I don't think anyone has given us a number to know how much that imagination is for that particular thing. I think in a modern building, HVAC goes there. Obviously, that wasn't covered by insurance. You could argue that's code. They could argue it's not, and we'll see where that goes.
Board questions?
Just to understand, I think you said it, but just to clarify it, the property and the facility are actually owned by the city proper. And then the other entity is an operator, is a manager of the facility, but they have no obligation to the capital expense of the facility, or
Well,
is that more complicated?
it's much more complicated. than
Okay,
that.
good, that's fine. You can leave it as it's much more
Yes.
complicated than that.
Yes.
I think that's important though, because obviously as the city decides what it wants to do collectively and appropriates money, now we're far in excess of just restoration. We're talking about improvements to the facility, and you're right, funding is the bottom line. And then the question is how much of that funding is going to come from taxpayers, grants,
I think
independent sources, or whatever.
DCED awarded a $325,000 or $50,000 grant to the association for the stone building. 100,000 of which is earmarked for a roof, and I don't know if there's any roof that's on a commercial building, it's $100,000. So, we're involved in those discussions about whether, we, the city, would be, or whatever warranty, whatever things would come based long-term things. So those are the details that we're in that are just sort of mechanical. Their lease technically expired. So it's a month-to-month association lease, which we're painfully aware of. And they are aware of it. And so we have sort of been at that, we'll work on the month-to-month as we're working through this problem. New members have stepped up, given their time, given their energy, to try and get this done. A company has volunteered to help with some of the stuff, which has been a property managed to a company, which is very generous on their part, and they made a commitment. We do have real expenditures on that land with the 10 is, I forget when it starts, might be January 2026, but the rent does go up. And so, we have an interest in moving it along, but you can only move it as fast as you can move.
Thank you. Others? Okay. So we had a little bit of discussion relative to the FNB Stadium earlier, and the question that's kind of been kicking around a little bit is if you could comment on the durability of the obligation for the team tenant, and then, if there are, project overruns, relative to the improvements, what the city's obligations might be there, as well as maintenance and capital costs.
So under a lease, I plainly did not write or negotiate. The city of Harrisburg has an obligation to make the stadium comport to AA baseball standards without thinking about maybe they will change over the years. And they've changed at least twice dramatically over the years. And if it's what I would call, in my word, a covenant, that if we don't satisfy, they have the right to then end the lease. We satisfy it. I believe it's through 2039, but I'm not positive. One of the last things Mayor Reed did when he lost in 2009 was extend all the contracts out 30 years. That was one of his going away. So I believe the senators was 2039. But we had heavy negotiations about retaining them. The council and the mayor very clearly wanted the team to stay. So as long as we can meet those standards. We have a RACP, it's a reimbursement piece. This is the only time we've seen, and Mr. Hart sort of designed this when he was Mr. Administrator, a purposeful 3-year budget over 3 different budget years to satisfy it. And it came in really close to the number that was imagined before we ever started. Because the RACP is $6 million for a $12 million project, and we had not a quote for anything. And we're coming in right around 12 as the projection. If it goes over, that's going to be an appropriation question for the council and the mayor, how they want to do it. But our obligation is to finish to make it compliant with AA standards. That is the obligation. As I understand, the team has sold out of the estate to a new owner. I'm unaware whether they have met with city officials yet or not. Typically, the owners do come in and meet with the mayor and others.
Questions?
Let us know if you don't. I think that the issue is, if you follow the stadium saga issue as an issue, a lot of these minor league stadiums are running into that problem with their host cities now, because many of them are municipally owned or in an exposition authority or something, and teams are making increasing demands on capital improvements. And then cities are having to decide whether or not they meet standards, or if they're going to lose their teams in less time than the lease, because they have exit clauses,
Right. And
which are very, very generous to the tenant.
right. And I could go into a lot of minutia how they got here on this round, which I don't think is worth going into. It just essentially, we had to make a decision. Do we invest the money? We were still in a position of being unable to borrow. We had come up with a very fancy way to get that borrowing done, and they wanted a $13+ million deposit to borrow $11 million. It's like, why would you do that? So that's where we decided it was going to be paid over 3 years of general fund money, out of tax dollars, and that was a clear decision by the mayor and the council. That was the move to say we're doing what we have to maintain the team in the city of Harrisburg. Thank you.
Thank you. Others? Okay. Well, you've been in front of us on prior occasions to talk about Neighborhood Services Fund and collections issues, and I know at least some of the staff has been dedicated specifically toward improving those collection rates and developing other strategies. So if you want to comment on that, and I don't know if you are authorized or capable to comment on the alternate proposal of doing collections through property tax bills.
So I've offered my opinion in no uncertain terms that the proposal does not work because it's under the real estate tax collection law versus the municipal claims law, and they're two different things. At the same time, I was asked and did provide a few years back a different proposed piece of legislation and never moved forward, mirroring what another third-class city had done to move those collections in a different manner, but basically to put them out to a private entity and how you would do it. I'm not involved in the political discussion. I don't know that politically anyone's ever come to terms with each other on what will work. There are limits to what we can do. The municipal lien law is the only law I know of where they voted to remove a statute of limitations. There is no statute of limitations for the city to file a lien against someone. There's no stopping us from filing the same lien again for someone, for a property. We can't file it against someone who's a new owner for someone else's debt, but we can enforce it by liens. The reality of a lien, we could move it to judgment. The city has always elected not to do that. If we take it to the outside sector, that is what they will do, is move liens to judgments. Which, and those costs increase on the property owner dramatically. Because they don't come out of city coffers, so they're add-ons to it. What we do is the lien allows us to hold the property to the next financing, the next sale, and our money is protected. And that's how the city has operated with the lien law over the years. It could be more aggressive in it. I don't know that, based on the level of the average income in the city, anyone has an interest in forcing a sale of homes that people live in over their trash bill, right? We lose the lien, as everyone does, if the property goes to such disrepair and doesn't sell at taxes and then goes to judicial sale, then we lose those liens just like everyone else. At that point, they're usually have been abandoned for a long time, the properties, and they're more likely to be demoed than restored. But that's the risk we have with liens. If we don't try to force a sale early, is that it get there someday and be wiped out. In the meantime, it's earning interests on the books as it's there. If you had a lien and had a bad spot where you lost your job for a couple of years, couldn't pay it, you get the notice of lien, your current balance goes back to zero on what you owe this month, but then you have a lien over here for the balance over filed in the courthouse that's running interest. So the next time you sell or transfer, that gets paid. We did close to $2 million out of my office last year in collections between liens, payment plans, and just flat out payments. And we didn't have a lien specialist until October of 2023. So that's a fairly good start with a program. I think he was mad, my guy, because when I went to council, it was at 1.9 some million. And by the time when we set it down, by the time we got to the hearing, it was 2. He wanted me to show that it was 2. He was very proud that he got to that number. From our view, the system is working. We have it fairly well balanced, where if it's a lien that is debt is above $10,000 commercial, our office works out the payment plan. If it's less than that, public works staff, administrative staff works out the payment plan. We went through every single lien that was $10,000 or more already last year, except we have a couple very large ones in dispute. One of them is the same one that we're in litigation challenging our fees there. The largest one, I think it was about $600,000. They're a private equity firm out of New Jersey. But all the 10,000 ones, we started at the top and we're very right down through. We are now over to residential that are like any system. As you go through that process, you start identifying some of the problems historically in the system. There are properties that never got billed, but tend to be land when we had a rated surcharge. And you try to get down to what's fair and what's unfair to those folks who that might be paying on one lot, not another. And we get to those discussions. Do they owe us for both? Under that idea, you can file a lien forever. And we spend a lot of time negotiating those sort of nuanced arrangements with people. It usually, again, it comes up when they're trying to either sell a property or they come in for a development plan or a new business license, and that's where this stuff comes to light. Otherwise, we just track them by numbers and how much they owe, and throw the vast majority of delinquencies, our percentages are under 120 days. Right. So you don't need property, you don't sell property, it's just the vast majority of 120 days or less. They're just slow pay and not able to pay. And that's the reality of the debts that are owed to the city. We see ourselves making progress. We've had trouble keeping, we also have a collection lawyer position in place that we have trouble keeping because kind of no one went to law school to be a collections lawyer, right? So we get them, they get some training, they get promoted or they move on, fairly quickly. And that position is again vacant. The last person that got promoted to deputy. So we're still looking for that position. So,
Thank you.
good for you.
Neil, are any of the arrearages from clients, folks outside the city in municipalities that we're servicing?
You mean, do they live outside the city or?
Yeah, we're servicing other municipalities at this point.
No, those are not in our system as that.
Okay,
You know, there is questions with the rearages, and that's the negotiation with the individual. Our biggest one on the books, frankly, to me, isn't real. There was an ordinance, I think, in the Steelton, where we had to bill the ones that had nothing there. And so there's no one to pay it. There's no building to service. There's no service being provided. And in our last negotiation for renewal, we addressed that to say, it looks like we're not collecting these, but there's nothing, we're not servicing them at all as an outside vendor. And we can't put a municipal lien in another borough. So it's really our question with the boroughs, not and townships, not with the property owner. They're supposed to cite the property owner for not having paid the bill. You know, that's the risk. They get cited for not having trash bill. We don't pick it up. They get cited because their trash is still there, just as they do when they have a private contractor out there. Because it's your obligation to have a contract, have your trash picked up.
thank you.
Sure.
Others? Thank you. That's my list. Do board members have questions on other matters?
Kathy's favorite subject, OPEB.
Yeah, where are we on trust? and
I was waiting.
Of trustees?
I don't think they'll have to be appointed. I think there'll be a petition to the court to change it. There was a position given informally by council of all taxes that by appointing trustees to a trust that is by definition legally bankrupt, which is what it would be. When you look at the front page of the audit, I think we're at $170 million OPEB, and it's a $3 to $4 million fund. All the money would be exhausted by professional services at that point, just giving them opinions and doing the audits and doing the things. So the question is, it's a great idea that wasn't going to work. And so eventually that will petition to come forward as part of the Act 47 bankruptcy exit. So the money is sitting there earning interest. But it was interesting design that, the board was approved. There's been no appointments to it. And it's very hard to ask someone to be a fiduciary to something because literally they have that personal responsibility. And so there's been no appointments made. So I think in reality, it will not come into fruition in its current design. Whether it's a different design, that's a different question. That's beyond just my office. But it's very hard to bring that into reality and put that upon individuals to step up to be in that position. Or for a bankrupt trust, we do think the money would be completely exhausted. Question is, can they spend money in a bankrupt trust? Like, what authority do they have to give away the money when the trust is still formed and doesn't have the correct amount of money? That was our tax council's concern.
Are there discussions as far as meeting the obligation on anything other than an every year basis?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Pay as you go on, meaning pay as you go for OPEB.
Yes,
That's it.
Funding.
I don't know, it's not really a legal question. That's sort of a,
And I don't know the answer if that discussion is on.
that would sort of be a policy decision of the administration, whether or not they want to consider something other than pay as you go for OPEB, annual OPEB expenses. Right now, at least for 2025, incorporated our loan line, the budget includes sufficient resources to pay the 2025 OPEB obligation. And that's what that's it.
Yeah. Also known as there's medical claim expenditures that we incur continuously.
Right, because the OPEB is mostly made up of post-employment medical insurance, folks.
Primarily medical,
Primarily.
yeah, if not all.
So that is the nature of the city's OPEB obligation. Other post-employment benefits is those that they pledge to provide self-insurance, health insurance to, and they just keep paying claims. And There, as you've heard, there is no trust or money put aside other than the annual expenditures that are appropriated through the budgetary process. So the city is always current, but never ahead.
And in theory, based on the recovery plans that the Commonwealth put together, that should go down. But the real dollars are not going down. I mean, but over time, there'll be less and less people that are qualified for the OPEB because the union contracts change to eliminate a lot of those. But it's gonna be quite a while before that realization gets in, you know. Those contracts were very generous.
And just if I can, I think you said it, but I want to make sure I quote you correctly. You said your recollection is that the total OPEB liability is somewhere in the neighborhood of $170 million.
Something, it's in the annual audit.
Right, I know I've seen it, but it's just for our discussion purposes, it's somewhere.
It's well in excess of, 125 million. It fluctuates.
Sure.
But it's.
And that's the actuarial determination of the entire obligation.
Correct.
For all the people
The
who.
entire theoretical obligation.
Theoretical
Right.
obligation, right,
They-
so.
They break it down among, police, fire, and everyone else, essentially non-union.
I apologize if I'm going far afield, but Brian, does that actuarial report that shows that, do they actually come up with like an annualized obligation also?
Yeah.
To say it's approximately X per year
They,
in expenses?
they do evaluation every other year.
Okay,
And then the in-between interim, they provide an update that reflects what the liability is at the end of whatever applicable fiscal year.
because you need to report
We
that
need
now
that.
in the act for us to.
That goes to the audit prep
Right.
for that liability. Right?
That's on the books liability, right?
Right.
And are they,
And-
sorry, I didn't mean to move.
That's all right.
But are they showing an end date on this to pay off this 170 million estimated?
It's when the last person
Dies.
dies, and I don't know if they have an end date, because it's all actuarial. It's because some of those pay things for a very, very, very long time. If you get someone who had a deceased spouse who died in the line of duty young, the benefits go on for very.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how far in the woods the actuarial gets into that level of detail.
Yeah, I don't recall in, reviewing that report that there is such a statement.
Sure.
Like a time end.
Like a time
Yeah,
estimate.
because it's just.
Well, they must have something though for them
Yeah,
to,
to do the.
to do the actuarial study, they must
Yeah.
at least be estimating something.
They take it, our HR department every year supplies them with, they call it census data. And that's what they use to do their actuarial counts.
Just as a follow-up, the establishment of the OPEB trust concept was part of the strong plan.
Correct.
So you're saying that, and that was accepted by the court, just shorthand. And so what you're saying is you envision a time where perhaps the court will be approached either directly or through some other mechanism and asked to amend that. portion of the strong plan.
It would be directly, it would be
Okay.
part of a proposed exit proposal, that these are the outstanding issues, that they're technical issues. These are the options and proposals. It may or may not engender a hearing. Hard to know. I believe we have lost I think she's now retired, Judge Ledbetter. I think she hit her mark. She's been the same judge on it, so I don't know who the next judge will be.
And I'm not gonna put Audrey and Michael on the spot, but do you recall in our Act 124, was there a direct reference to the OPEB trust as well?
That
Not
was
just,
gonna be my follow-up.
okay, I stole your thunder, I
No, that's all
apologize.
right. No, I was
So
just gonna
that's
say.
another challenge. It's in our state law as well, that it's referenced, that it says, shall comply with the establishment of an OPEB trust. Which means that it's not just the strong plan.
Well, that's why I say it may have a different form. Under the form right now is absolutely defined, how it has to be, who has to sit on it,
What they mean by saying OPEB trust might change.
Yes, I mean, so under, if we could, and this was a nice idea that got defined by lawyers who shouldn't write trust documents if they don't know anything about it. But this was, I think, some lawyer in Atlanta's idea of what would work in theory, and it just doesn't work. And, at that point, by the way, we didn't have the annual reporting that comes in the audit where the actuarial is there. So once we got to those two realities together, they just didn't align at all.
And I think when you get to the point of that, it would be good to look at Act 24, but look at it comprehensively. Because at one point we also talked about, would it be possible to, because it says right in there that the city can't borrow until all these things are done. And so we want to look at that language as well, so that if you're going to the well to ask for some changes to Act 124, just to make sure that we hit every issue that would stand in the way of the city getting the opportunity to borrow.
Sure, my interpretation is probably different than yours back in the 24.
Okay.
And my interpretation I'll present to the court of what Act 124 means as to the city's exit of Act 47. Our obligations will be, it'll be, it's been pretty well developed over the years. And,
And you'll share with us.
no, you are not my client. So, the,
Can you speak up?
I feel like I just had a gauntlet.
but yeah, so I expect a remarkably clean exit from Act 47 when it comes. I expect every stakeholder who participated in that to join in that when we get there. So I think that the one interest long-term for everyone that's still there is the court is sitting on the equivalent of consent decrees that go on for another 30 years. And no one wants to lose the benefit of that. And so everyone who's a stakeholder has an interest in a clean, neat packaged exit when it comes.
Thank you.
Other questions for Neil? We do appreciate the time you spent with us, and as we noted earlier, the amount of work you do for the city and territory you cover.
I will note there's one other extraordinary thing going on, just because you may read about it. The city has petitioned for receivership of one of our largest slum landlord in the city.
Right.
Last year, they were found guilty of 1,900 separate citation violations. They've been in bankruptcy court. We got leave to go to the common police court to get a receiver appointed. The owner has for now, it started in 2019 and it's just kept going. They have refused to put money in. It's an LLC from out of state. And it's a HUD related property with liens on it. So it's very complicated, but so we are now asking the county judge to take control of it, appoint a receiver, but with the condition the city would seed money, so real money would have to redirect the thing, with the condition that court order required us to be reimbursed as the property was brought back to a cash flowing operation. We understand there's money there to get all that done. The existing owner was unwilling to do it. But I just wanted that's going to look like an extraordinary obligation on the front end.
We couldn't hear you. There was a unison coughing here. What property is that?
That is the Governor Square property. in
And-
That's
Upton.
all right.
You didn't miss it. That's the
No,
first
they
time he
found-
said it.
Yes, they're technically called Uptown Partners. There's two of them, and we have, the largest one is the one on the petition, the second one is not. And, we filed that on January the 10th. The court has not yet scheduled an initial conference to discuss the matter.
Is that under the Blighted and Abandoned Properties Conservatorship Act or?
No, completely an equity claim. We copied something that City of Lancaster did on a much smaller scale. Receivership has to be temporary in nature. Their condition is the same one we're asking for. The receivership remain in place until such time the entire property is brought to compliance with all building and health codes. But putting someone who is already knowledgeable, but also can work with HUD, in spot to do that, and get control of the information in the property. Interesting.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Well, we appreciate you being with us today. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Okay, next on the agenda is the authority managers update.
Very brief report. You all received the bills paid report through today, very brief list. If there's any questions, happy to answer. The only other information I have for you is that it's January, so we'll be issuing our annual taxes. So we don't pay taxes, But we do have to do 1099s for our consultants, so we will be doing this.
Is this the time of year we do our ethics filings?
A little later,
A little bit later. Thank
May,
you.
May, yeah, soon, you'll get an email with Monday, when the time comes.
Thank you.
That's it, sir.
Any questions for Jeffrey? Okay, is there any other business from the board members? Public comment?
I know we have quite a few people in the audience today, so I don't know if you'd like to introduce yourself and ask any questions that we can help you with. And you have?
Sure. Eric Epstein, Rocky Capital. I have a couple observations that are also questions. The one question I have for ICA is, you're one of the few bodies that doesn't do a pledge of allegiance. I'm just wondering if there's a reason for that. And you could always put a flag up there, but just an acknowledgement, we cover about 30 different entities. You're the only one who does it.
Never come up before.
Pardon?
It's never come up before, but we'll take it under advisement.
Yeah, and well, most people do the pledge of allegiance. So the question I had at the county today, the city discussed extending a Florida zoning protocol. So the question is, what is that material impact on the city? I understand that, I understand the reasons behind it, but I was looking for a number. Also, if I'm reading this correctly, the city is not budgeting anything for the subordinate payments for the parking system. Am I correct or am I wrong with that? The other question I had is, in trying to work with the county on this, the use and useful life of the Harrisburg, whatever you want to call it, that Laxmama owns, is going to be done in the 2030s. And I've met with a couple of people and trying to project what the option is. I haven't seen or heard of any good ones, so I don't know if that's something the city is thinking about. I haven't heard anything. I know the annual reports came in for 2023, but there were 5 outstanding audit issues identified that have yet to be addressed. So it would be nice to have those addressed, or at least have some kind of timeline on that. I raised an issue, and I don't know, I think maybe with Brian, is on the healthcare. One of the things, I mean, we have 1,100 employees at Central Boston, and we have similar health insurance dynamics. And I raised this before. We save a considerable amount of money on the carve out for prescription drugs. So I don't know, excuse me, if that is something you look forward to. The final point is, I got to be blunt with you guys. The economic development presentation that I sat through was underwhelming. Some of the comments included, I want to see targets and projections and adjustments. So I don't know. Again, Neil and Brian, you don't have to answer any of this. We attended all the meetings and you can see some trends, but the OPEB issue has been out there for a while, and it appears there's an assumption you don't have to address it. One of the things I point out about OPEB, because we also have it, most people are not pre-funded in the real world, but the assumptions, and people miss this, that OPEB is based on tend to be outdated, tend to be 10 to 14, and nobody drills down, or, I mean, a person like me who's got no life will read the assumptions. But I would just point out that could have a material impact on some of the projections. So, I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I don't know, Jeff, if you want me to send those questions.
You're
All right,
welcome
I
to,
can
sure.
Copy Neil, I have his address, and I know he's real happy.
Yeah,
about
I'm always
that.
happy to receive your written questions.
Yeah, the other request is, are you allowed to share with us the 5 questions you had?
Yeah, it's a public document now, so yeah, I'll
Okay.
definitely share with you. I have a copy for you.
And I'll just comment briefly on LERTA. I omitted mentioning that in my earlier report, but last meeting I mentioned that we've been asked to sit on the work group that the city's convening to rewrite the LERTA program. And that was the basis of the request to City Council and the School Board for the 1-year extension under the current terms, while this work group could come together and find something that is going to optimize its utility for the city. It has been in place for a while. It has yielded some results, probably could be more efficient. And then as with any program like this, there's opportunity to establish priorities based on types of properties you want to push for redevelopment, and so on.
I believe it has to be a district, not a property.
Right.
But
Right,
I
but
mean, the only reason we've been petitioned to do alerta, and I'm always, reluctant to give up revenue. Especially since we fell victim to a TIF at Harrisburg Mall, and while they look enticing, there's no guarantee that there's gonna be value at the end of the day.
understood.
Thanks, Eric.
I will note, the school district in the city have voted to extend it by 1 year. I have not heard the result from the county yet. That's it.
Nor have I.
You guys have the lead.
Yeah, can I point out one other thing for in Central Office, we are doing a reverse tax appeal, so we harvested about 1.1 million this year.
Sure.
The reason I'm bringing that out is because the county sold the Aetna building, we bought the Aetna building. Out in whatever that something park, I always forget, which removed about 94,500 tax revenue for us. In every economic projection I hear from you guys, it always says, we're gonna look to cultivate more violence. The Bureau of Assessment and Appeal, when I contacted them, don't really have any recognition of when they did the last pilot. So I mean, if you're going down that road, I don't know how successful you're gonna be. And Neil, I said this before, we go to all the Bureau of Assessment and Appeal meetings, and you guys are usually the main target, unfortunately. I know you attend some of those meetings as well.
We have some large properties.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brian, do you have anything you'd like to ask, Tim?
No.
Thanks. Thank you for attending. Appreciate it.
You're fired.
With DC Detroit, do you have anything you would like to say today? We always appreciate the agency being here. The department's great.
That was great.
Okay, thanks, sir. And Sam, do you have anything you want to throw in?
No, I think you already spoke to the city, we see we have to,
Sure.
just look forward to working with you.
So,
Does everyone?
Nice to see you again.
I think so. Sam, why don't you introduce yourself, just in case everybody doesn't know who you are in the room?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I'm Sam Costa, the business administrator. I've known Jeff for quite some time, we actually did some of the small Pennsylvania borough programs together.
We're TV stars.
So I have about 15 years' experience in municipal management. Most of that with boroughs, also with city management, the city of King. I have almost 5 years' experience in county government, in Indiana and Fulton County. Spent 3 years working for the state of Pennsylvania. There's 25 years' experience in government. Pretty well qualified. And have an actual tie-in with Harrisburg is also over. I was a member of SAFE at one point, so I worked the back in 2000. So, knew Maria Kelly well, she was actually, she was with ECD. Training for
Bob is the numerator.
So, I started back in October and, did my first budget cycle, was very educational. I'm sure I'm gonna do the same type of thing again. You do what you have to do. So. But that's all I have. So if you guys have any questions, I'll stay up. Yes, thanks.
Thank you,
Yes,
Sam.
Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. And I believe that concludes our agenda for today. And so do we take a motion to adjourn?
Emotion, but no second.
Okay, we'll take a
You have
motion.
a date.
Yes, we do.
I'm sorry, forgive me, April 23rd is the next meeting,
April 23rd.
April
Yes.
23rd.
Yes, the chair now meets with the mayor and staff without a quorum of the board in between those meetings. So those meetings fill in for the other months in between. But there's a regular schedule of those meetings, and we only come together every few months.
And the reason for that is that with the work the city's done toward financial recovery, the urgency is probably overstated, but the urgency of meeting on a monthly basis is no longer there. And so we tried to time our schedule a little bit spread through the year. So you'll see a cluster of meetings toward the end of the year as we get toward budget preparation and adoption time.
All due respect, the trends remain the same. We've been here for 5 years, so you have the opportunity to interact. Public doesn't. I don't know if that's part of your charge or not, but, there used to be every month.
Right.
So,
Well, we also wanted to make sure that the meetings weren't just meetings for meetings' sake. And so we've tried much more deliberately now to make sure that we do have people come, that there are substantial conversations and but when we adopted this slimmer model of meetings, we didn't exclude the possibility that we would have more meetings. But we also thought it is better not to always cancel meetings, but to rather call them when we needed them, in an absence of a standing meeting.
yeah, nothing, I would respectfully disagree, but, I think more meetings are better than less.
Thank you for your comment. All right, so we have the motion.
No, you still need a motion.
We're-
Motion.
Move to
I'll
adjourn.
make.
Great, get that to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.
It's at 4:38.
Because I